A meal that changed everything. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as I stood at the counter, carefully preparing breakfast. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the soft sizzle of eggs frying on the stove. It was the day of the monthly family barbecue, an event that had become less of a joy and more of an obligation over the years. I glanced at my son, Oliver, who sat at the kitchen table, sketching in his notebook. His pencil moved swiftly, bringing a new creation to life. A watercolor painting of a beautiful countryside, complete with a blue sky and rolling hills. "Mom, do you think Grandma and Grandpa will like this one?" Oliver asked, his voice filled with cautious hope. I swallowed hard. I knew the answer. They wouldn't even look at it. But I couldn't tell them that. Not yet. "I'm sure they'll love it," I said, forcing a smile as I brushed my fingers through his sandy blonde hair. Oliver had always been gentle, kind, and full of wonder. He found beauty in the simplest things. Art, nature, even in people who didn't deserve his kindness. And yet, he was invisible to his own grandparents, a family divided. My relationship with my parents had always been complicated. I was the older daughter, the independent one, the overachiever, the too sensitive child who was never quite enough. My younger sister, Lisa, on the other hand, was their golden child. She had done everything by their book, married early, became a stay-at-home mom, and remained completely financially dependent on them. Her daughter, Amy, was the light of their lives, the center of their attention. Meanwhile, Oliver? He was ignored. It wasn't outright cruelty. They never raised their voices at him. They never insulted him. They just pretended he didn't exist. Whenever Oliver showed them his artwork, my mother, Barbara, would give a quick glance before shifting the conversation to Amy's latest achievements. Whenever Oliver tried to speak, my father, Frank, would talk over him, asking Lisa about her busy life as a homemaker. It had been like this for years. But today, I had a feeling that something was about to break. And when it did, there would be no going back. A silent warning. Later that afternoon, as we packed up the car, my husband, Michael, walked up behind me, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Are you sure we should go?" he asked quietly. Michael had always been my anchor. While I often kept my emotions bottled up, he saw through me like no one else could. "I don't know," I admitted, "but it's Oliver's family too. He deserves a chance to be loved by them." Michael sighed. "I just don't want him to get hurt again." Neither did I. But I had to believe that maybe, just maybe, today would be different. With a deep breath, we loaded the car and headed toward my parents' house, unaware that by the end of the night, nothing would ever be the same again. The barbecue begins. My parents' house was as pristine as ever, white painted walls, a perfectly manicured lawn, and a backyard big enough for grand parties. As we pulled up, I saw Lisa and Jason already there, their daughter Amy sitting comfortably on my mother's lap, giggling as my mother fussed over her hair. The moment we stepped out, my father waved from the grill. "You're late," he called out. "We're right on time," I said, smiling stiffly. My mother barely glanced at Oliver before turning back to Amy. "Oh, sweetheart, Grandma brought your favorite cookies today." Oliver hesitated, gripping his painting tightly. I could see the flicker of disappointment in his eyes, but he didn't say a word. I swallowed my frustration. "Just give them time." "Hey, Grandpa," Oliver said, mustering his usual cheerful tone. "I made this painting today at school. Do you want to see?" My father barely glanced at it before returning to the grill. "That's nice, buddy." Lee said, "Do you want your steak medium or well done?" I clenched my fists. He hadn't even looked at it. Oliver's shoulders slumped, and he quietly folded the paper, tucking it under his plate. Michael shot me a knowing look, one that said, "This isn't going to change." And maybe he was right. The burnt steak incident. Dinner was finally served. Plates were passed around, filled with perfectly grilled steaks, fresh salad, and warm bread. Then my father placed a plate in front of Oliver. I froze. The meat on his plate was burnt, completely blackened. The edges were curled and crispy, the entire thing charred to the point where it barely resembled food. Oops, my father chuckled. Guess I left one on the grill too long. My mother laughed. It's just a little overcooked, but it's fine, right? Lisa smirked. Even a dog wouldn't eat that. As they all laughed, Oliver just sat there, staring at his plate. I saw his little hands tremble as he gripped his fork. He wasn't just hurt. He was humiliated. Michael shifted beside me, his jaw tightening. He looked at me, silently asking, "Do we let this go?" "No, not this time." I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to remain calm. "This isn't acceptable." The table fell silent. "What do you mean?" my mother asked, frowning. I lifted Oliver's plate, showing them the burnt, inedible meat. Everyone else got a perfect steak. Why was my son served this? My father shrugged. It just happened that way. He's a kid. He doesn't care. I turned to Oliver. "Do you care?" Oliver hesitated, looking down at his lap. He wasn't used to being asked that. Finally, in a small voice, he whispered, "Yes." Something inside me snapped. I stood up, picked up his plate, and walked straight to the trash can. Without breaking eye contact with my father, I dropped the burnt steak inside. "We're leaving." My mother gasped. "Laura, don't be dramatic. It's just a joke." I stared at her. "Do you see Oliver laughing?" Silence. They didn't care. Not really. And for the first time in my life, I finally saw it for what it was. Michael stood up beside me. "Come on, buddy," he said, placing a hand on Oliver's shoulder. Lisa scoffed. "You're seriously leaving? Over a piece of meat?" I turned to her, my voice steady. "This isn't about the meat. It's about respect. It's about love. And it's about how our son deserves both." Oliver took my hand, his grip firm. We walked away without looking back. A new beginning. That night, as we sat around our small kitchen table, eating homemade burgers, Oliver smiled for the first time all evening. "This is way better than Grandpa's steak," he giggled. Michael grinned. "Told you, kiddo." I watched him eat, finally free from the weight of their approval. And I knew this was the last time I would ever beg for love from people who refused to give it, because from now on, Oliver would only know the love that he truly deserved. And so would I. The breaking point. The drive home from my parents' house was silent, except for the occasional hum of the engine and the quiet sniffles from the backseat. Oliver sat there, looking out the window, his face unreadable. He wasn't crying anymore, but the sadness in his eyes was something I couldn't ignore. Michael drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on my knee, a quiet reassurance that I desperately needed. I kept replaying the night in my head. The laughter, the humiliation, the look on my son's face when he realized he was nothing more than an afterthought to them. I had endured my parents' favoritism my entire life. But this was different. Because now, they weren't just hurting me. They were hurting my child. And that was something I would never, ever allow again. Confronting the past. By the time we got home, it was late. I helped Oliver change into his pajamas and tucked him into bed. He was quiet as I pulled the blanket over him, his little fingers gripping the edges. "Mom," he finally whispered. I knelt beside him, brushing his hair back. "Yes, sweetheart. Why don't Grandma and Grandpa like me?" His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my throat tighten, my vision blur. How do you explain to a child that the people who are supposed to love them unconditionally choose not to? I swallowed hard. "Oh, baby, it's not that they don't like you." He looked at me, his blue eyes searching mine. "Then why do they always treat Amy better?" I hesitated. "They just don't understand how special you are," I said softly, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "But that doesn't mean you're not special. You are. More than they will ever know." Oliver was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "I don't think I want to go to Grandma and Grandpa's house anymore." Tears welled in my eyes. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close. "You never have to, sweetheart. Never again." He exhaled, relaxing into my embrace. "Okay." And just like that, a decision was made. We were done. A line drawn in the sand. The next morning, I woke up to find Michael in the kitchen, his arms crossed, his expression tense. "What's wrong?" I asked, rubbing my eyes. He turned his phone screen toward me. It was a message from my mother. "Laura, I hope you've had time to calm down. What you did last night was incredibly disrespectful. We were just joking, and you embarrassed us in front of everyone. You're being overly sensitive, as always. I suggest you apologize, and then we can move on like adults." I let out a hollow laugh. She really thought I was just going to sweep it under the rug. She thought I was still the same person she could control. Michael studied my face. "What do you want to do?" I took the phone from him and typed back, "Mom, this isn't about a joke. This is about years of mistreatment, of me, and now of Oliver. I won't apologize for standing up for my son, and I won't allow him to be treated like this ever again. Consider this my final decision." I hit send, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The aftermath. The next few days were strange. For so long, I had structured my life around trying to be good enough for my parents. Even as an adult, even after I built a career, a home, a family, I still sought their approval in ways I didn't fully realize. But now, there was silence. No calls, no messages, no attempts to fix things. And that, more than anything, confirmed what I already knew. They never cared. Not really. Michael could see the turmoil in my eyes as I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, waiting for something. He sat beside me, taking my hands in his. "You don't have to pretend this doesn't hurt," he said gently. I exhaled. I always thought that if I did everything right, they would finally love me the way they love Lisa. Michael squeezed my hands. "You've done everything right, Laura. They're the ones who failed." His words settled deep in my chest, grounding me. He was right. It was never me. It was them. And I wasn't going to let them break my son the way they had tried to break me. An unexpected visitor. A week later, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Lisa standing there, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. "You're being ridiculous," she said before I could even greet her. I sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "Hi, Lisa. Nice to see you too." She rolled her eyes. "Mom and Dad are upset. They think you've lost your mind." I shrugged. "That's their problem." Lisa scoffed. "You're seriously cutting them off over a piece of meat." I tilted my head. "Is that what they told you?" She frowned. "Because this isn't about the meat, Lisa," I continued. "This is about years of them making me. And now my son. Feel like we don't matter. And I won't let that continue." Lisa let out an exasperated sigh. "You're always so dramatic." I smiled. "And you're always so blind." She blinked, caught off guard. "You have no idea what it's like to be on the outside of that golden circle," I said, crossing my arms. "You never had to fight for their attention. You never had to prove you were worth loving. But I did. And now they're doing the same thing to Oliver. And I'll be damned if I let that happen." Lisa's face twisted into something between frustration and guilt. "They're still our parents." I shook my head. "No, Lisa. They were never really mine." She was silent. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I needed her to understand. I had my own family now. One that loved me without conditions. A future without them. That night, as I tucked Oliver into bed, he looked up at me with a small smile. "Mom." "Yes, baby? I'm happy we don't have to go back." I smiled, brushing his hair back. "Me too." Michael stood in the doorway, watching us, his arms crossed over his chest. "You okay?" he asked softly. I looked at my son, then back at my husband. I thought about the years I spent begging for love from people who would never give it. And then I thought about the love that was already here. The love I had always deserved. "I'm better than okay," I said, smiling. "I'm free." And as I turned off the light, I knew this was the beginning of something new. Something better. Something that was finally, truly ours. The life reclaimed. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The absence of my parents and Lisa should have left a gaping hole in my life. But instead, it felt like a weight had been lifted, a weight I had carried for far too long. At first, I expected regret to creep in, the way it always had whenever I dared to push back against my family. But regret never came. Instead, there was peace. I no longer had to brace myself before phone calls, no longer had to watch my son shrink in their presence, no longer had to accept scraps of love while they showered Amy with everything. For the first time, I was free. And I was never going back. A new kind of family. One Saturday morning, I found Oliver sitting at the kitchen table, lost in his sketches. I walked over, ruffling his hair. "What are you working on, buddy?" He grinned, holding up a drawing of our house, our home. It was detailed, with sunlight streaming through the windows and little flowers lining the walkway. In front of it stood 3 figures. Me, Michael, and him. I felt a lump form in my throat. "It's our family," he said proudly. I traced my fingers over the lines of the drawing, feeling an overwhelming warmth in my chest. For so long, I had believed that family was something you were born into, that no matter how much they hurt you, you had to hold on. But Oliver? Oliver already knew the truth. Family wasn't about blood. It was about who stood beside you. And in this house, in this life we were building together, he would never have to question that. A familiar face, a different feeling. A few months later, I ran into Lisa at the grocery store. It had been a long time since we had spoken, and I wasn't sure what to expect. She hesitated for a moment before making her way over, her face unreadable. "Hey," she said. I nodded. "Hey." She shifted awkwardly. "Mom and Dad, they still talk about you, you know." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure they do." Lisa sighed. "They think you're being unreasonable." I let out a soft laugh. "Of course they do." She hesitated again, then glanced at the shopping cart where Oliver's favorite cereal sat on top. "How's Oliver?" she asked. My chest tightened. The fact that she had to ask, that she didn't already know, told me everything. "He's doing great," I said. "Happier than I've ever seen him." Lisa looked down. For the first time, I saw something in her eyes. Not anger, not judgment. Just understanding. "I hope so," she murmured. And then, without another word, she turned and walked away. I didn't call after her. I didn't try to fix it. Because for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need to. The future we chose. That evening, as Michael, Oliver, and I sat on the back porch eating dinner, I watched the sunset paint the sky in warm shades of orange and pink. Oliver laughed as he told us about his art class, his eyes bright and full of life. Michael reached over, squeezing my hand. "You okay?" I looked around at everything we had built. This life, this love, this home filled with warmth. And I smiled. "I'm more than okay," I said. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Because at the end of the day, family isn't who you're born to. It's who you choose. And I had chosen right. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.